Well, everyone, welcome this afternoon to Native Plants for the Home Landscape. My name is Alyssa Vinson. I am the residential horticulture agent at the Manatee County Extension Office. And I'm joined today by Eileen Valdez from Manatee County Libraries. And she's going to go ahead and start us off and talk to you a little bit about the library program and some updates that they have for you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today, and thank you, Alyssa, for doing what I'm sure is going to be another great program for us. Again, I'm Eileen Valdez. I'm with the Manatee County Public Libraries. I'm the assistant supervisor over at the Palmetto Libraries. I guess in library news that some of you might already know and have used, we're doing curbside pickup of holds this week, and we are gearing up and hoping that we will be able to open starting next week to the public at a limited capacity. We will be continuing these Zoom programs though. We have in about 2 weeks from today, we'll have a series with Alyssa about how to be climate smart Floridians, and that'll go on for 6 weeks. You can also check out our Facebook page. And we are also on Instagram, just Palmetto Library. And we have a lot of book clubs and different things going on then. Yep, so we're hoping to be working up onto the public soon, but I will give it away to Alyssa for our native plants today. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Eileen. So like Eileen said, we are going to be having a series starting in a couple weeks, Climate Smart Floridians, and that is 6 separate webinars. So look for information about that. Today we're going to talk specifically about native plants for the home landscape. And one thing that I want to do right off the bat is just for anybody who's new to our programs is describe what extension is. The University of Florida IFAS Extension, the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, is one of the programs in the state of Florida that is run through our 2 land grant universities. So we have the University of Florida and then the Florida Agricultural Mechanical University, FAMU, that are our 2 land grant universities. And the mission of Extension is to take research-based information and provide it to our communities in an accessible way that enhances their quality of life. So in Extension, we have a variety of programs. I'm in residential horticulture. Within my role, I manage our volunteer program, our Master Gardener program. I also work with the Master Naturalist program, and I do a variety of other programs related to landscapes in urban, suburban, human environments. And that's only one small piece of the pie though. At Extension, we have several other agents who focus on things as varied as our food and nutrition program, our Master Money Mentors program. We have people that do nutrition programs for children in schools. We have marine fisheries. We have commercial horticulture that addresses things like nursery management and training for landscape professionals. We have a livestock agent. We have the 4-H program that is a youth program specifically. And so I think you can see that we really touch on a lot of different facets of people's lives. And indeed, in 2019, our impacts to Manatee County were, these are just a few of our impacts that we were able to quantify for you to highlight our program. And you can see that we had over $1.4 million in the value of CEUs provided to pesticide license holders, over $860,000 in value of volunteer time. And that's really, we have over 109 Master Gardener volunteers who will dedicate 10 to 12,000 hours a year of their time to provide educational opportunities to the public. So a lot of that dollar value comes from our Master Gardener volunteer program. 28,000 youth were educated through the 4-H Youth Development Program, and over 14 million gallons of water was saved to utilities customers. So these are just a few of our impacts, and I like to start off just at the beginning to let y'all know who we are and what we do if you're not familiar with us. And if you're not, please check us out. So before we get to that slide, I am going to ask you a question. I'll launch a poll. You'll see a question pop up. Please go ahead and answer the question. Which of the following best describes an invasive plant species? And you can read the responses. Choose the one that you think is the best answer to that question. I'll give you about a minute. Okay, we're at about 90% of you having voted, so I'm going to go ahead and end the polling, and I'll share the results with you so you can see. So of these answers, you'll see what the correct answer is on the next slide, but of these answers, about half of you thought that a non-native plant species is one, or an invasive plant species is a non-native plant species with negative economic, ecological, or human health impacts. And you know, roughly about a half, 42% thought that it could be a non-native plant species with aggressive growth habits. Only one of you thought that it was a native plant which aggressively takes over landscape beds. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to our next slide. And you will see, so there are some terms that are important for us to recognize when we first start off talking about native plants, right? What does it mean for a plant to be native? And I wanted to ask you about invasive plants, mainly because there's a large misconception out there that refers to aggressive or weedy plants as being invasive. And so I wanted to make sure that we address that misconception right from the beginning. But you can see that invasive, it is kind of loaded terminology, but it's a species that's been moved outside of its normal geographic range via human action. So it's something that we have either purposefully or inadvertently moved with us, which goes on to cause economic or ecological harm, and in some cases human health implications. And there's a couple species in particular that have some human health implications. So that's invasive, right? It's a species that it's not from here, it comes here either on purpose or inadvertently, and then goes on to cause documentable harm. An exotic species could also be called non-indigenous or alien, just means that it's not native to a particular location. Some ornamental species are exotic, right? Naturalized species are those non-native species that have begun to reproduce outside of their native range. And then a native species is one that is it's from here. And when we say from here, we mean that it was documented in the firsthand botanical accounts that were written down during European colonization of Florida. So that's what we kind of rely on. We can look at things like the archaeological record, and in some cases, the fossil record to identify certain plant species that were here over geologic time. But for the large group of taxa that we have available to us, most of the time what we're looking at is if it's native, it was documented as being here during that time period of European settlement. So is ornamental always invasive? Can a native plant be ornamental? And I would say no and yes. An ornamental plant species is one that is grown and cultivated for the purpose of sale in landscapes, right? So we're going to be using that plant as a landscape feature. And so that's what an ornamental plant is. So you can have you can have native plant species that are ornamental, and you can have exotic plant species that are ornamental. One thing that's very important to remember is that a native plant species can never be considered invasive. They can be aggressive or weedy, but they can never be considered invasive, okay? Any questions there before I move on? You can go ahead. Again, the chat has been disabled, but you can answer in the Q&A. And if you're watching on Facebook Live, if you type a question under the video in the comments section, we have one of our staff who's monitoring that who can enter it into the Q&A here in the webinar. So how do invasive plants get here? And, you know, why are they a problem? I think it's important before we start talking about, you know, pretty native plant species that you can put in your yard to recognize some of the reasons why planting natives is so important. And one of those reasons is to help kind of prevent the spread of these invasive plants that can cause ecological or economic harm. I like to put up this map. This is the Koppen-Geiger climate classification map. And you'll see where Florida is located is that nice limey green color. And you'll notice that that limey green color is in other places of the world as well. And one of the things that's really interesting about this is that if you start to look at where some of our invasive plants come from, things like air potato, Brazilian pepper, right? They come from regions of the world that have similar climates as Florida. So if you look at that limey green and you kind of look around that map and spot other areas where you have that limey green color, you can begin to make decisions about what kinds of species could potentially be invasive. And so that's one of the things that the University of Florida has done is they've put together the IFAS assessment, which is a way of asking questions about plant species that are used in the ornamental trade or for some other kind of economic purpose. And before they're brought here and really sold broadly and utilized broadly, is there a way that we can ask questions about that plant species to determine whether or not it could be invasive? And so climate classification is one of those characteristics or factors that comes into play during that assessment. No, somebody asked about knickerbean as invasive, and no, knickerbean is native, so it cannot be invasive. It's aggressive and weedy, and it'll give you a good poke, but it can never be invasive. Okay, we're gonna go ahead. So here is what I was talking about with the IFAS assessment. If you're not familiar with it, when you get into the you know, habit of looking around for different plants for your landscape. Maybe you're starting a new gardening project. Maybe you work with somebody for a landscape company and you're thinking about different plant species that you're going to put in at properties. You can always go to the assessment, and I include the link here, assessment.ifas.ufl.edu, and you can type in either the common name or the scientific name of a plant into the main search bar on that page, and it'll pull up a lot of information about that plant, including whether or not it's considered to be invasive. And, you know, there are some species on here that you kind of have to take with a grain of salt. For instance, like mango is considered a high-risk species in our area, but obviously it's a cultivated food. So, you know, when you're looking at it, remember that some things that are maybe food crops or grown as, you know, backyard fruit trees, they might fall into that high invasion risk, but you just have to make sure that you're managing them for potential escape. So why native, right? We talked a little bit about what invasive is, right? And these are things obviously that can cause economic or environmental harm. And they do that by either hybridizing with or taking up resources, or in some cases just growing up and over and pushing out our native plant species. Some of these invasive species create what we call monocultures. One of those types of species is the Australian pine. It actually produces a monoculture underneath it and has some some documented allelopathic characteristics, which means it produces chemicals that prevent other plants from growing. So when we ask the question, why native, there are a lot of reasons, but one of them is we want to make sure it's not invasive, right? We don't want to add to that burden or that pressure on our adjacent natural areas by putting something in our landscape that could potentially escape and be a problem, and then folks like our county land managers have to go out and spend their time and money trying to remove them from our natural areas. So some of the reasons besides that are that they provide important pollinator habitat. I'm sure a lot of folks have seen in the news in the last couple of years headlines that say like insect apocalypse, right? We've been documenting globally a large reduction in our pollinators and in insect species in general. So when we plant native plant species, particularly flowering natives, what we're doing is we are providing the food, the food and reproductive space for those pollinators that are here naturally. We're also providing some necessary ecosystem services, right? I'm sure we could all agree that the difference between a live oak canopy and a crepe myrtle is pretty significant, right? How many species are supported by a live oak? How much rainwater is captured? How much erosion is controlled by those native plant species? They tend to be lower maintenance. So when we're planting native plants in our landscapes, these are plants that are adapted to our climate and our nutrient poor soils. So they tend to be lower maintenance. Now I say most of the time because it doesn't mean that they're no maintenance, right? We can't just stick them in the ground and walk away from them. But they do tend to be lower maintenance, lower water, lower nutrient requirement. They can create wildlife refuges among this development that we have. And I'll show you an image here in a minute that I think really speaks to that. But if you think about all of the numerous creatures that lived here prior to development, when their habitat was removed, they suddenly lost a lot of, they lost their homes. They lost their food sources, they lost their shelter. And so what we can do when we reincorporate native plants into our landscapes is we can create little refuges for this wildlife, whether it's birds, bats, bees, snakes, what have you. It allows them to have these little pockets of refuge among our development. And one of the most important things I think about planting natives is that you really gain a sense of place that you wouldn't gain otherwise. So recognizing that we are not the original inhabitants of this space that we occupy, and finding plant species that are from this area really connects us, I think, in a deeper way to the environment in which we live. And it allows us to kind of feel like we are helping to reincorporate these plants that maybe we've taken away from this area that we occupy, this place that we live. And you really get familiar with species that you wouldn't otherwise, right? If you go to a big box store, you're gonna see like the same 20 plant species over and over and over again. You go to most major new developments that have been planted out by maybe 10 different landscaping companies. They're gonna look the same, right? You're gonna have maybe 20 different plant species in all of those landscapes. What planting native plants allows you to do is to increase your diversity of plants and to really recognize species that you would not find elsewhere, to see things that are uniquely Florida. And I think that that's very important. So when we think about planting natives, it's important to recognize what types of environments were here before us, right? Here in Manatee County, we have Manatee River, so we have some river floodplain. We have some salt flat marsh area. We have some mangrove estuaries. We have Gulf coastal dunes. We have slash pine, flatwoods. So these were the types of environments that existed in this space before us. And there are plants that were uniquely suited to these environments. And so some of the plant species that we're going to talk about were those species that were uniquely suited to our environment. And then we went from this to this now, right? So we've developed, we usually remove most of the vegetation when we develop, and then we put in turf grass lawns and we irrigate them, and everything pretty much looks like this. So how can we kind of change our space by reintegrating some of these native plants? So what can you grow instead? I think that the next few slides, I'm going to go through some different plant species that are really good for planting in the home landscape. They're separated out into a few different categories, and then we'll talk a little bit about maintenance and planting of those native plant species. Most of the photos that you're going to see, I took myself, and most of them are from areas here in Manatee County. So what can you grow instead? How about, let me ask a quick question, and you can answer in the Q&A. Who knows what this plant is? I'm just curious to see how many native plant gurus I have in the audience here. What plant is this? Just type your answer in the Q&A if you know. Okay. Good. So I've got one correct answer. So, okay. Misconception. Good. Okay. I have two folks who said ragweed, and actually I'm really glad that a couple people did say that, because this is not ragweed, this is goldenrod, and goldenrod is a really great beneficial native wildflower that is confused very often for ragweed, and it does not have the same allergen potential as ragweed. This is most likely Solidago sempervirens, because this is in a coastal environment, but there are numerous other goldenrod species, Solidago, and we'll show another one of those a little bit further on. So I'm going to start with ground covers and vines. This is sunshine mimosa, which is a native, it's actually a legume, so it has some nitrogen fixation capability. You can see a happy honeybee there visiting the beautiful little powder puff flower that they have. I actually think of these like little tiny truffula trees. They remind me of little truffula trees because they have this really skinny little stem and then a bright pink poof right at the top. These will grow very quickly. You can plant a 1 gallon size container in your landscape in a full sun area, and they'll cover about 10 square feet over the course of 3 months. So 1 gallon to about 10 square feet, and it'll cover that space in about 3 months. They're very quickly growing, especially if they're in full sun. This is native peperomia, which peperomia is a plant that you find in the ornamental plant trade as an indoor plant very frequently in different species. This is the native peperomia, and it's actually a great ground cover for shady environments. So, and slightly moist, not too dry, but they're gonna be a good low light ground cover. Frogfruit is one of my favorites. It actually, when you find it in the wild, it likes to live on kind of the edges of wet areas. So not actually in the wet itself, but kind of right at that margin between like maybe the edge of a creek or a pond or a wetland, creeping up into the drier areas where you'll find frogfruit. It likes full sun. It has these really nice little clusters of flowers. You can see that once the petals drop, they kind of, they look a little bit different. It's also called matchstick plant or monkey tanglefruit, I think. It has a lot of interesting common names, but it's again another good ground cover for full sun, but they're going to prefer a little bit more moisture than the mimosa will. Blue-eyed grass. This is going to be a short grass, approximately 6 inches high, with these lovely little spikes that come out with these blue purple flowers. And so you can plant them in a clumping manner, and they work really well as a ground cover. They prefer full sun, and they also can handle the sort of moderately moist to moderately dry area. Railroad vine. It is commonly found, it's a coastal dune plant, so that tells you a lot about its environmental requirements when you're planting it. It can handle very sandy soil, low nutrient. It can be used intermixed with other plant species to create kind of a diversity of leaf shape in your ground cover. You can plant it pretty thickly and it will create a pretty nice ground cover on its own. If you're trying to contain it within like a distinct border, you will need to trim it back pretty frequently to prevent it kind of spilling out. But you can see it's in the morning glory family. It has this beautiful purple bloom on it. And yes, Linda is asking salt tolerance for railroad vine. It is highly salt tolerant. It is from that coastal dune system, so it's used to getting salt spray from heavy wind and wave and storm action. So yes, it is very salt tolerant as well. Coral honeysuckle vine is often used in arbors and kind of climbing up trellises, but it can also be used as a ground cover, and it has these beautiful coral trumpet-shaped flowers. I've seen hummingbirds coming to visit mine. This is a very happy bee who's climbed almost all the way into the flower. They do like full sun. They have very low salt tolerance, so don't plant them in a salty area, but they can handle sandy soils and full sun. Okay, Linda, I'll answer that question in a minute. I'll type the answer for you. Okay. Beach sunflower is one that you've probably seen. It's gained a lot more popularity as a landscape plant because it has these, you know, bright, showy flowers, and it has good drought tolerance. It does like full sun. It's going to be moderately salt tolerant because it is, again, a coastal plant. It's not going to be able to handle, you know, like full salt spray. But let's say that you have it in an area where maybe you have a little bit of saltwater intrusion into your well water. This would probably be okay with that, depending on the amount of salt. The beach sunflower can handle some moderate salt. And again, full sun, sandy soil. These are gonna have, it's gonna be a large clump, and they do tend to go dormant in the winter time. At least they die back a bit. And so it's good to cut them back. And to encourage some new growth. Okay, so these are kind of clumping things that you can use as ground covers. Wildflowers, there's like no end to wildflowers. Actually, the photograph that's behind me in my background is something that I took just a week ago in Myakka River State Park. That's a native wildflower. It's a polygala. And I wouldn't recommend planting those unless you have a bog in your yard. But wildflowers can really be one of those things that you can really go down a rabbit hole in. So I'll try not to do that. Stokes Aster is a really nice one for it can handle full sun, but it can also handle part shade. It's a perennial clumping aster, similar to Echinacea purpurea. So you can actually, over the years, you can kind of separate out these clumps, these clusters, and spread it out. And they're gonna produce these nice, big, lilac-colored flowers. Moderately sandy to moderately moist soil, no salt tolerance here. Dotted horsemint, Monarda punctata. This one is an annual, but it reseeds readily. So if you have it in your yard, anticipate that you will have it in your yard forever. Likes very sandy soil. It can handle full sun to part shade, low to moderate salt tolerance, and it can get up to about 3 feet in height. Pollinators love this. It's also called, I think it's also called spotted bee balm is another common name for it, but it has these really beautiful, these are the flowers and then these are the bracts here. These are specialized leaves that are colored and they smell great because they are in the mint family. So these are a really nice wildflower. Most of these wildflowers I would recommend using if you have like a very manicured space. Then some of these wildflowers would probably do well in potted arrangements, or maybe you have some areas where you could fill in between some kind of structured bushes and things like that you want to fill up some space and add some color. You could use these for that purpose. Otherwise, you know, definitely used in like a naturalized landscape or in kind of a meadow garden or pollinator garden type landscape is going to be the best use for these wildflowers. Tropical sage, Salvia coccinea, is another annual. It can handle moist to moderately sandy soil. This is another one that reseeds readily. If you have this in your yard once, you will continue to see it popping up all over your yard. It can reach up to 4 feet in height, and it does handle part sun to part shade. So it's a good one for, it's not gonna like being baked in the full sun, particularly if you have a westward exposure. This one isn't gonna really take that, and it has a low salt tolerance as well. Blanket flower, this is another annual, 12 to 24 inches high. It is a clumping annual, so it can create really nice coverage in one area. This is another one that reseeds very readily, likes very sandy soil, can handle full sun, and this one has low salt tolerance. Sea Oxeye, Barrickia frudescens. This one is going to be full sun, very sandy soil, very salt tolerant. And when I say very salt tolerant, I mean this grows on the backside of mangrove swamps quite frequently in the transitional zone between mangrove to upland. So they can actually be inundated by fully saline water and be okay. You know, they're not going to like it if you water them with salt water all the time, but they could handle it if you did, or if they got infrequent salt loading. 2 to 4 feet tall. These guys are perennial. They'll grow by rhizome, so they'll spread out in a nice space for you. And here's another goldenrod. There are many different varieties of native goldenrod. There are also goldenrod species that grow all across the United States. So it really is a wide range of salt tolerance, soil tolerance, height. There are some shorter goldenrods, and then there are some goldenrods that can get up 4, even 5 feet tall in some instances. Most do prefer full sun though. Blue curls is one that I think is just absolutely beautiful, but it is an enthusiastic cedar. So similar to the tropical sage, if you plant the blue curls in your yard and you have an environment that they like, it's likely that you'll see them year after year. They are an annual. They like full sun, sandy soil, low salt tolerance for this one as well. And then milkweed comes in all kinds of colors and shapes here in Florida. I could probably teach a class just on milkweeds. There are several available varieties. There are some that are specific to wetlands, so they're going to like really moist, high nutrient soils, and there are some that are specific to pine rocklands. So they're going to like very low nutrient and full sun areas. So they really are available in a number of different species. Butterflies love these guys. Obviously monarchs love these. So if you're interested in butterfly gardening, definitely get the milkweeds. And I will add a note in here about the non-native tropical milkweed, try to avoid it wherever possible, even though you may see a lot of butterflies kind of coming to that tropical milkweed. They hybridize with our native species, and there's some indication that there may be a higher toxicity of, I'm not gonna be able to remember the name of the toxin right now, but they actually, the caterpillars build up this toxin in their body as they eat the milkweed, and the tropical milkweed has a higher concentration than the native milkweeds do. So there's some ambivalence in the research there, but wherever possible, try to use the native milkweed. Spiderwort is one that I think is underutilized. It has these really gorgeous flowers. It's short-lived, perennial, so it will grow for more than one growing season, but it's not a very long-lived plant. It does spread quickly. It likes full sun to part shade and moderately moist to very dry. So it is a plant that can handle a lot of different environments. When you see it in the wild and in its natural environment, it's going to most often occupy that kind of similar space as the frogfruit does on those edges where the environment is starting to transition away from a wetland or the edge of a stream or a pond into a drier upland area. Liatris is another one where there are several different native species. Some have flowers that are only 12 to 16 inches. Others have flowers that come on these long spikes all the way up to 4 feet or more. So you're gonna find these most often in our wet prairies. And so they do prefer kind of a moderately wet to slightly moist soil. They're not going to enjoy a full sand, very dry, rapidly percolating soil. So that's something to consider. They do like full sun, but again, there's going to be a variety of requirements there because of the difference in species. Okay, so again, we can do a whole class on milkweeds. We could probably spend a whole class just on wildflowers. That just gives you a taste of some of the wildflowers that you could kind of incorporate in different ways in your landscape. I put grasses, shrubs, and small trees together. I've got just this grass here because I think that it, is a beautiful grass, and it's one of the best that can be used in the home landscape. This is MUHLY grass. The flowers that you see there get this beautiful smoky purple in the fall and winter here in our area. And they're just gorgeous. They really add an interesting structure to a landscape because of the feathery lightness of the flowers. There are other grasses as well, things like ACACIA grass. Aragrostis is another one that I think is underutilized. It has a beautiful bluish hue to the grass blade. So there are lots of different native grass varieties, but I always like to highlight MUHLY grass, especially when I'm talking to a mixed group of people, because, for people who aren't familiar with native plants, because it is so striking in its coloration. For shrubs, MARLBERRY is one that I think is very underutilized. It has these gorgeous, shiny leaves, white clusters of flowers, and then these black purple fruits, and it's a great bird attractant. Pollinators also love the white flowers. It has medium salt tolerance, so it can be used in areas where, let's say, the irrigation water has been determined to be kind of salty, or if you live in a coastal environment, MARLBERRY is from that environment, so it's going to do great. You can keep it trimmed as a multi-stemmed shrub, or you can let it grow up into about a 15-foot tree. So it is variable in its shape based on your pruning maintenance. PINXTER azalea, we have a few different varieties of native azaleas. This one I just wanted to highlight because I got this great photo of the flowers as they were blooming in our native shade garden that we have in our demonstration space at the extension office. And And this is one, it's going to prefer shadier environments, a little bit more nutrient in the soil, moderate moisture level, but really these blooms are just stellar. They come out before the leaves do, so you'll see the blooms on these bare sticks and then bam, these beautiful pink flowers. Beautyberry, I think people are kind of catching on to beautyberry. I'm seeing it used a little bit more. It can be used in full sun. It has a wide range of tolerances for soils. It has low salt tolerance though, so you're not going to want to put it in an area where it's going to be exposed to salt. It has these gorgeous purple flowers that then turn into those really vibrant purple berries. And it is frequented again by pollinators and by birds. So it's a great food source for many different species, which is something that I love about it. It smells incredible when you rub the leaves, crush the leaves and smell them. It smells incredible. It's a really nice plant to have in your landscape. It has kind of a fuzziness to the leaf. It adds a softness. It can be used, it's kind of a limey green coloration to the leaf, but with that softness from the fuzziness. And I think it really can be used nicely in many different landscapes. It can be, again, it can be pruned to maintain kind of a shorter 4-foot rounded shrub shape, or if you let it go and let it grow all summer long, it can get up to about 8 feet tall. And again, it's going to have a nice, very round shape naturally. It does like a pretty hard prune back in the winter though, so give it a nice hard prune back once a year. Firebush has started to gain in popularity as well. This is one, there's a native species of firebush, and then there is a cultivated variety of firebush, and they're gonna look slightly different. There's a dwarf variety as well that I've seen being used more frequently in professional landscapes. They're going to have these really bright orange-red flowers on them. Pollinators love them. They do produce some little kind of black-purple fruits, and birds will eat those as well. You can see they kind of have this orange ombre vein going down the middle of the leaf, which I just think is gorgeous as well. These can be, again, you can prune them to be a multi-stemmed shrub with a nice rounded shape, or you can purchase one that has a single trunk and you can trim it up into a small tree. And if you trim it up into a small tree, it can handle up to about 15 feet or so, will be kind of the top end for that small tree. They are, hummingbirds like them. They're very good. They can handle full sun to part shade. They're going to prefer no salt, and they can handle a wide range of soil as well as far as nutrient is considered, because so when we find firebush in the natural environment, it tends to be an understory tree in mixed hardwood systems. So you're going to see some variation there in soil type. Jamaican caper is going to have high salt tolerance, beautiful blooms in the spring, really nice, shiny, dark green leaves, almost kind of a gray, reddish gray coloration on the underside of the leaf on the Jamaican caper. And this is another one that you could use as a small shrub, or you could allow it to grow up into a small tree form depending on your pruning. Again, this is going to be found typically in our kind of coastal berm sort of environment, so they can handle, like I said, salt, as well as very sandy and low nutrient soils. Sweet acacia is a really interesting tree. It smells really good. It has these wicked thorns and again, has these beautiful little powder puffs. There's something so fantastical about these little powder puff blooms. And you can see that the leaves, they're very filamentous. And so this really soft leaf structure with these globes of golden puff, and then these super sharp wicked spines make these a really interesting and fun either shrub or small tree that you can add to your landscape. These tend to be found in a single trunk form as a small tree between 12 to 15 feet. Walter's viburnum, you have probably seen it. And here's a close-up of the white flowers. White flowers are going to be around about March in our time of year, or in our area of Florida. So get these really nice clusters of white flowers. This is what they look like kind of on the entire bush. This is one, again, if you prune it into kind of a rounded form, you can have a shrub or you can have a small tree. There is a dwarf Walter's viburnum variety that only gets to about 3-4 feet tall, and that one is used pretty frequently in landscapes as small mounding shrubs. All right, and then I'm just going to touch on a few trees. Flash pines, underutilized, underappreciated. They support a wide range of species. They're quick growers, so if you need shade quickly, they're good to give you some shade. They're gonna like full sun. They can handle super nutrient poor soils, sandy soils. They have moderate salt tolerance. Again, I think they're an underutilized tree. We have a few different varieties of native hollies. We have DAHOON holly, and then we have on the right is the YAUPON holly. This one is actually the weeping form of the YAUPON holly. You can get it in a weeping form or a non-weeping form. And these are kind of medium-sized trees. So around about the 25-foot range at the top end. And the oaks, we have so many oaks. You can see a live oak, southern live oak on the left-hand side with that very typical form of a live oak, those low reaching branches, that big broad canopy. I read a study a couple years ago that said that one live oak tree can support up to 350 other species just within its canopy and surrounding soil area. So it's pretty incredible what one tree can do. I wanted to highlight just another one of our native oaks. This is a sand live oak, so it's going to be more suited to sandier, hotter environments, and it's going to be much shorter in stature than our big grand southern live oak over there. But there are lots of different kinds of oaks. There are laurel oaks, white oaks, scrub oaks. If you are interested in learning more about the different oaks we have available, or maybe you're thinking about planting an oak tree in your property, don't jump immediately to the live oak, right? It might not be the best suited to your environment. One of our other types of native oaks might be better suited. Sea grape it's a tree. Some people treat it as a shrub, and it can be treated as a shrub if you are diligent with your pruning. It can get up to about 35 feet tall at the top end. It's another one of those, it's quick growing, and because of the large dish-shaped leaves, it can really provide shade very quickly. It is able to produce these fruits, these grapes that the birds love. I have a very large sea grape in my front yard, and I have yet to harvest any fruit off of it. It is edible for humans, but I can never get to it before the birds do. So it's nice to be able to see the native birds coming in and eating those. And they do live in, so you can see this photo here has a sea grape right here, right up at the water's edge. So they are highly salt tolerant. They live in very low nutrient environments. So they're going to be able to handle most landscape situations. So those are just a few highlights. And again, we're at 250. So If you have questions about specific species, if I didn't talk about a certain species that you want to hear about, please send me an email. I love native plants, and I will be happy to talk to you about them. I wanted to talk just a little bit about care and maintenance. I think that people have a misconception that if a plant is native, they can just plant it and walk away from it. And that's not necessarily the case. So I want to talk about, you know, these 4 things are things that we would have to think about in any landscape. But we really, with native plants, we can't just walk away, right? Especially if we're taking them and we're putting them into a manufactured landscape and into a landscape that is not a natural environment. So for folks that live in newer developments, so these are developments, let's say from 2000 on. If you live in one of these newer developments, something that you should be really aware of is that when your house was built, there was a lot of machinery running back and forth across your landscape, and it's likely that you have pretty compacted and low nutrient soil. So when you get into the planting phase, it's really important to go out there with some kind of a dowel or a bamboo stake and poke it around in your soil and just see if you can easily press that down into the soil at least 6 inches, then you're doing pretty good on compaction. But definitely pay attention to compaction, and you may need to add some organic material or till that soil a little bit in order to loosen it up and make it more suitable for planting. I apologize if you hear my dog in the background. As far as irrigation is concerned, you know, these plants are going to need to be watered in order to get properly established. So one of the things that we can do, especially this time of year, is we can say, okay, now's a good time to plant new plants because I'm going to have a lot of help from the rain, right? So that's something that you can kind of plan your plantings around our rainy season so that you take advantage of all that rainwater to irrigate those newly planted plants. When you're getting ready to plant, when you're planning out your landscape, think about your irrigation. Do you have access to a rain barrel? Are you going to be utilizing you know, a hose spigot? Are you running a sprinkler? Are you going to set up a temporary drip system? These are all different considerations for irrigation. Temporary drip systems are really a great way to get plants established and then remove that irrigation from the landscape. When you're using a drip irrigation system, the water is being you know, it's being placed exactly where the plant's going to use it, which is in the roots, right? You don't want to overspray your plants very much, because when you're doing that, especially if you're watering kind of the wrong time of day, which would be, you know, the middle of the day or right before evening time, you're going to be encouraging that moisture to stay on those plants overnight, because we have really high humidity overnight here in Florida. What should you expect for establishment? Just like any other plant, if you're planting things like wildflowers, small shrubs, expect it to take up to 3 months before that plant is established. Larger shrubs, small trees, 6 to 9 months. Large trees, up to a year before that plant can be fully able to live on its own without you needing to go out and check on it and water it. Now, I'm not saying you need to water it every day for that time period, but you're going to need to check on it and make sure that it's not showing any signs of drought stress. And then think about pruning. Think about thinning, think about weeding. When your annual wildflowers die back, go in, shake the seeds, save the seeds if you want to, or just spread them around in your landscape. Remove that dead material. If you have perennial wildflowers like those clumping Stokes Asters, go in, break up those clumps, spread them out, thin them out a little bit. If you have things like beautyberry, firebush, they're going to need a prune. Go ahead and trim them back. Think about mature size, think about desired structure, think about form when you're going to be trimming either trees or larger shrubs. So those are just a few considerations. make sure that if you have questions, you can send an email to manateemg@gmail.com. And that's our, that goes directly to our Master Gardener Volunteer hotline, our Plant Clinic hotline. And our volunteers will take a look at your question. They'll provide you with a bunch of resources to help work you through that problem that you're having. And in the case that they can't figure it out, it'll come to me. And if I don't know what to do with it, I'll send it up to somebody at UF and we'll get you an answer. So here are some additional resources I wanted to point you to. FloridaYards.org is a database of Florida-friendly plants. And you can select when you go into that database that you want native-only plants. So you can go in and you can say, I want native-only shrubs that can handle full sun, low salt, right? And it'll pop out a list of suggested plant species. So that's a really great resource. That's why I have it at the top. It's a really good way for you to find some additional information or get a suggested list of plants for certain areas in your landscape. The Florida Native Plant Society has amazing resources. I highly encourage you to check them out. They, our local chapter, the Serenoa chapter, has meetings and field trips when we're allowed to. I think they've been doing some of their meetings via webinar right now. If you're looking for a place to buy native plants, check out the Florida Association of Native Plant Nurseries. They will provide you with a list of local native nurseries in your area. You can go in, type in your zip code, and it'll pop up a list of those native nurseries. The UF IFAS assessment and FLEPSI, the last resource there, are going to be resources that you can look at to see if a landscape plant that you have or something that you're interested in purchasing may be classified as invasive. And again, I definitely recommend go on to the IFAS assessment, type in a few plant names. I think you'll be surprised at some of the things that you find out. All right, let's see in the Q&A. Special time of year to trim beautyberry or firebush. With beautyberry, I usually like to wait until after the fruit starts to kind of naturally senesce. So the fruit, you can tell when it's like brilliantly ripe, it's gonna be that bright purple, the plant's gonna be full. I like to let the birds eat as much of that as possible, and then once they're done, I cut it back. So that's gonna be round about October, November is when I like to trim it back. And then it won't grow very much during our dormant season, but then look around about March, April, and they really start to shoot up. I had one go from about 4 feet high to 8 feet high in the last few weeks. So they really, once we get into our rainy season, they really do kind of explode. And the same goes for firebush. Chased tree. Yes, we do have native chased tree. And then Linda asked a question about mimosa and frog fruit salt tolerance. Mimosa has a low to medium salt tolerance, and frog fruit has a low salt tolerance, I believe. And I had a question, how do I feel about native coffee plant? Nothing wrong with it. I like it. I didn't list it here just because I think it's used very frequently. There is a shiny leaf variety and a velvet leaf variety. Pollinators like the flowers, birds like the fruit. I just think that people are pretty familiar with that one now because it has been used pretty ubiquitously in landscaping. All right, and if there are no other questions, thank you, Bryce, for the nice comment. I'm gonna go ahead and end our webinar today, but I really appreciate you joining us and look for some of our upcoming webinars. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.